Welcome to the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast, a podcast for the naturally curious who want to define their own path. Here, I'm sharing bold move stories that propelled my guests from curiosity to action. And in doing so, they've defined a path that is purposeful to them. Through these stories, I hope you'll be inspired to pursue your boldest dreams. Today, I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to Sandy Rosenthal. Sandy is a prominent activist, author, and founder of Levees.org. It's an organization established in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The group advocates for awareness about the engineering failures of the levee system in New Orleans that led to catastrophic flooding. Rosenthal has been a vocal critic of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering, highlighting their role in the levee failures. She also authored a book titled Words Whispered in Water, which details her journey in exposing the truth about the Hurricane Katrina levee disaster and holding those responsible accountable. Often referred to as the Erin Brockovich of levees, Sandy's work has been widely recognized for improving flood protection systems nationwide and advocating for engineering degree programs to teach about the failures to ensure it never happens again. Sandy, hello. I am so grateful you are here today. I am honored to shine a light on your story, particularly on the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina this year. Thank you for being here.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we are going to get into it. This is a real David versus Goliath bold move story. And I am so fascinated to hear how you found out about this cover up that led to the destruction of the entire city of New Orleans, how you advocated for the answers and for change, and mobilize an entire community of change makers to make sure it doesn't happen again. And as I already said, this year, 2025, marks the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, but yet there's still a misconception about what happened. So we are going to get listeners the behind the scenes to really unfold the true story of what happened during Hurricane Katrina and your work that is advocating for this change. But really quickly, before we get into that, I want to take listeners back to that day. It was August 29th, 2005. And according to the National Weather Service, Katrina made landfall on the Gulf Coast, barreling towards New Orleans as a Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds of 175 miles per hour, which is incredible to even think about. Like, wrap your brain around that amount of winds. And after all was said and done, it took 1,833 fatalities and $108 billion in damage. It is considered one of the worst natural disasters in history. And you found out some of the destruction could have been prevented, and that has become your mission. So let's get into it now. Okay, so take us back to 2005. Will you touch on your life before Katrina? What were you doing and what did life look like? And then tell us about this alarming cover-up story that ignited your bold moves from there on.
Well, sure. Just prior to the levee breach event, I would call it living the idyllic life. I paid my dues, and by dues, I meant I had done the 8 to 5 thing. Okay, that 40-hour week. I was very good in marketing and copywriting,
Yeah.
and I had reached a point in my life where I could work part-time. I was valued enough that I could take time during the day to play tennis and get my work done the rest of the day. That was back in the day where you still went into work. So
Yeah, before remote work.
exactly. So I had only one child at home. Two of them had gone off to college. I just had the one, a
Yeah.
boy, and boys are very self-sufficient. They're doing their thing. So again, I was had the perfect, uptown girl life. I was 48 years old, having a wonderful time, and then
And then,
everything changed in the scope of
okay.
a few hours. Everything changed that when the levees broke. And in New Orleans, we don't use the word Katrina. We may use the
Mm,
word Katrina to mark a point in time,
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
even then, any New Orleanian would say before the levees broke in New Orleans. That's the word, because we now know it was not a weather event. It was a engineering failure catastrophe.
Yeah, so that prompts me to ask you, like, how did you find out about the levee failure? And not just the levee failure, but there was a cover up behind it.
Exactly. Well, I should preface by before I jump into it, I
Sure.
should alert your listeners that the hurricane didn't go to New Orleans. It went to Mississippi, the state of Mississippi. New Orleans only received the outer bands of the storm. And those outer bands of wind caused the water to rise, and levees started breaking all over the city of New Orleans, but at 50% of what they were designed to hold.
Mm,
50% what they were designed to hold. So, and once they
wow.
broke, New Orleans, as probably most of the country knows, is a bowl. And the bowl filled up and the water had nowhere to go.
To go.
But again, this was engineering failure. And so you wonder, I'm not an engineer, not an attorney, not a
Right.
politician, not none of those things. So how is it that me, a total layman, figured this out? Well, you know what? Most big problems are figured out by people who are not in the industry for
Mm,
reasons we could probably write another book on. But people are afraid to speak out. People are
mm.
afraid they might be wrong. So when I started on this mission, I always had it in the back of my mind, what if I'm wrong? Well, I was prepared to say, oops, and with no harm done because I haven't ruined my career. So I just want to make that
Yeah.
point. The people in the industry are the ones to bring the light.
Can you explain the engineering failure, the engineering of the levee system that then broke, and why it broke, real quick, for listeners to understand what happened?
Absolutely. Levees broke for a couple of different reasons, but the biggest failures, the worst failures, the failures that did the most damage were
Hmm.
caused by
Hmm.
failure by the Army Corps of Engineers to drive steel sheet piling down into the levees to reinforce them. Steel's expensive. In the 1980s, the Army Corps was behind schedule, costs were rising, and they were looking for ways to save money. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I look for ways, that's why we go to Costco. There's nothing wrong with that. But in their search for a way to save money on steel, they made a mistake. They figured out after doing a study they only needed to drive the sheet piling down 16 feet instead of, you want to hear this, 46.
Oh
So
my gosh.
they changed their guidances from 46 to 16, and they sent this out to all the levees were built with that 16 pounded down number. Well,
Well,
Hurricane Katrina's outer bands came along, the water rose, the water got behind those levees, and they fell over when water was still 4 feet from the tops of the wall. So I'm not
mm,
an engineer, but
mm.
I know
Yeah.
something's wrong here. When I
How did
started,
you uncover that they had only been, entrenched in the ground the 16 feet, and that's why they broke? How did you come to find out and learn that?
it took a little while to get the exact mechanism of failure. It took a little
Mm,
digging and it took a little while later. However, it was obvious from the beginning if the levees break 4 feet from the top, that wasn't a weather event. That was an engineering event.
sure,
And so
sure.
that we could be sure of. I didn't have to know why.
Yeah,
A witness to a shooting, no,
yeah.
ma'am, did you see Mr. A shoot Mr. B? Yes. Well, why? Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And too often, and that's what makes people stop in the track.
Mm,
They're supposed to know why. I don't know,
mm.
but I knew
So,
something was wrong, and I just wouldn't let go.
and you wouldn't let go.
Mm-mm.
What did that mean for you? So, how did that start your advocacy?
Well, in right from the beginning, the Hurricane Katrina, the weather event was blamed for all this flooding. The weather event.
Mm,
Here we
mm,
were. you know, 1,800 people perished immediately. 1 million people lost everything or almost everything.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
the weather was being blamed, and there was a story being told that we should have been prepared. We knew this could happen, and we didn't do anything. None of this is true, but that's the story that got out there and got around the world, and everybody
Mm.
believed it. So when there is a major catastrophe, beware the early reports. They are pretty much 100% wrong. Yeah,
Mm.
and as people, we wanna know now. We wanna know now what happened. We don't wanna wait till for the reports to the shuttle disaster, the Challenger, it was years before
Mm.
they that report was finished.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
but we don't wanna wait, and we wanna know now, and we'll believe whatever we're told, if as long as it fits with our worldview.
What do you think the emotional toll was on the people of New Orleans because of the misinformation that was spread?
It was traumatizing, debilitating. A lot of people went into a post-traumatic stress that lasted for years. We, the victims, were blamed for what happened to us. We were, you name it, we heard it. Oh, New Orleans, none of them have flood insurance. When it turns up that most New Orleanians who didn't need it had it anyway, but there's a news out there. The local levee boards were blamed for not paying attention. So all these things caused us to
Mhm.
be it was absolutely traumatizing. I myself now know that I was suffering from from stress by my
Mm.
inability to do something as like sit down and watch a rerun of Seinfeld or a rerun of I Love Lucy. I was
Mhm.
incapable of sitting down and just relaxing for a few minutes.
Mm.
I had to be constantly reading,
Mm.
looking, listening to the radio, watching television about the disaster, what happened and why.
Mm. And that did that motivate you to action? Why you? Why did you decide that this was your mission? This podcast is all about people making bold moves. And I think there's something about like uncovering the motivation, the how did you know you could do it? And so I always like asking this question about sure, you saw there was a problem, you became passionate about it, but why did you take it on your shoulders to do something about it? It became the bold move of your life.
It did. Well, all major events, there's a little luck involved. You like meeting the right person or finding the right tidbit of information. There's always a little luck involved.
Mhm,
Always. It's,
mhm,
what's the old thing? Success is when preparation meets the opportunity. Okay,
mhm, mhm.
that's very true. Well, in this case, there was a little bit of luck. When we
Yeah.
evacuated ahead of the storm, my husband told me to pack for 3 weeks. He's an insurance agent. He
Mm.
understood what could happen if a major storm were actually to do what it was supposed to do, to hit New Orleans. In all honesty, I think I'm the only person who packed for 3 weeks. Most people pack for a couple of days.
Right.
I'm not going to say that with a straight face because I've asked
Mhm,
everyone I know.
mhm,
So so that was luck. I was
mhm,
prepared. So even though I
mhm,
was evacuated and couldn't get back home for
mhm.
months, I had everything I needed. That's one. And I had the luxury of being able to read and listen. A million of us were trying to figure out where am I going to live? How
Yeah.
am I going to work? And where are my kids going to go to school? I didn't have to do any of those things. So,
Mhm,
and then the
mhm,
other piece of luck, if you want to call it that, is I
mhm,
met a man from the middle of Louisiana,
mhm,
and by then I had my theory. The levees should have held. They were misbuilt, wrongly built. And
mhm.
he proceeded to berate me and everyone I know, told us we had no business living in New Orleans. This was our fault and we deserved no help.
What?
Yes. I
Wow.
I could meet him today, I would thank him because he actually
Mhm.
he turned me into what I am today. That
Yeah.
conversation. And I told my husband that night, I have to do something, and I did.
And you
And
did. So you talked to this man. He gave you that spark or that lit that fire. Like, heck no, this is not my fault as a citizen of New Orleans. This is not anybody's fault. who lives in New Orleans. There is a mechanical engineering failure that's to blame here, and we need to get this out into the public domain. Let me ask you, what was your goal, your hope of getting new, more factual information out into the world?
Certainly. That was the only way we were going to get the help that we needed from the federal government. This was a federal era. And so it was up to the federal
Mhm.
government to send us the resources and to send us the help,
I see.
FEMA, which is federal.
Sure.
And if the whole world and Congress and the president believes that we were at fault, what kind of help are we going to get? So that was my initial reason that I did this. And then as I continued to work, I realized anyone in the country, this could have happened to anyone. Every state in the nation, there are people living in counties protected by levees. 62% of the nation's population lives in counties protected by levees. That's nearly two-thirds.
Wow. Yeah. So anybody is at risk. It just depends on the right circumstances to come in and put those levees to the test.
Look
And
at
the hope is,
Hurricane Helene and
yeah,
what happened in up in the mountains.
right in Asheville area. Yeah,
That's
exactly. Yeah. Great point. That's a very recent example of how all of this still continues to persist.
just say this one quick thing. 20 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. And we couldn't text. No one knew how to text. That's a big difference between what happened in New Orleans and what happened in Asheville. In Asheville,
Mm,
they never totally lost communication. We
right.
lost complete and total communication for nearly a week, and hopefully that's the last time in American history that happens.
That happens. Yeah. Good point. So I'm so interested in your grassroots campaign, call it. I'm not sure. I don't know when levees.org became an organization, but probably not early on, especially not in the first 90 days. So, what did the first 90 days look like for you advocating to get the truth out there and expose this cover up of the national federal government, which is, I mean, by any stretch of the imagination, one person taking on that amount of power feels, what's the best word? Insurmountable, maybe to some people. So, what did the first 90 days of advocating look like? How did you do it?
Certainly. Keep in mind, I had one child still at home, and he happened to be a software technician. He loved tinkering with computers and writing software. And he said, "Mom, if you will come up with a mission of what you're trying to do, and we'll give it a name, I'll do a website for you." And so that
Okay.
night we picked a name. So this was October of 2005.
Mhm.
And right about the time that I got into that argument with that gentleman, who I wish I even knew his name. One day I'll
Right.
have to find him because I have ways of finding him. Anyway, and so we selected a name, levees.org. Back then, no one even knew what a levee was, but all
Right.
the URLs were available. We could have had levee.com, levee.org, levee.net. We chose levees.org. And he created a website. And then I said, well, now what do we do? How am I going to get anything done? I'm just one person. So
Right.
I said, I know, I got it. Members. We need members. We need lots of us. So I wrote out a petition and I addressed it to the President of the United States, who had promised that he would build back the levees bigger and stronger. I wrote the petition, put it up on the website, and this is before social media. I just
Mm.
we did have email. I emailed all of my family and friends and asked them to sign the petition and put their
Mm.
name and address and email. And overnight,
Right.
we got 200 people overnight.
Wow.
A lot
Okay.
then, which is a
Yeah.
lot back then. And keep in mind, a lot of people were displaced, living in
Mhm.
Texas and all over the country, literally everywhere. They're called the diaspora. And so a
Right.
lot of those supporters, members were from outside of New Orleans, but about two-thirds of them were from the New Orleans area.
So you got the petition signed, and then you started using your voice, social media. How
Sure.
did you get people to like join a cause?
Again, we didn't have Facebook back then, or it was a fledgling thing. We didn't have
Yeah.
Twitter. YouTube was just getting started.
Yeah.
We used just email, and our first
Yeah.
thing was an event. We hosted an event at the Army Corps of Engineers. which is in New Orleans. The levees are public property, and we
Uh-huh.
held an event outside of. It's actually on the levee. This is the only building in all of New Orleans where there's a building on a levee. It's the Army Corps headquarters, and we had our rally outside of the Corps headquarters, and about 300 people showed up, which is
Wow.
remarkable for a city that had hardly any people living in it. This was
Right.
January of
Right.
2006. This is 3 months after the flood. And that put us on the map. I mean, we had lots of press there, local press. I don't think there was national press, but that got to start somewhere.
Okay, so inside of this grassroots campaign now that is starting to really feel like it's bubbling up, it's getting some attention, people are activated. You are the community organizer, let's say, fighting for this change.
Hmm.
But I heard that the government started creating opposition groups to tire you out and make you back off your campaigning. And so I was curious about how this challenged your journey and how did you ultimately succeed in fending them off? And also, like, what other challenges did you face over, your first couple of years in getting this going and trying to get some attention for the fact that this is a massive cover up and we're fighting a really, a huge mega power opponent?
I'm certain this is going to be shocking to your listeners, but the federal government did organize and created a campaign to disparage me online, to
Wow.
mischaracterize me, a character assassination, if you will, organized
Wow.
by the federal government. Believe it or not, it's not illegal. It is
Mm.
not illegal. However, and this is critical, it's embarrassing when they're caught. And that's what happened. Using back end tools available to any amateur blogger, I was able to figure out that the people posting vicious comments about me and my supporters and my family were themselves Army Corps using Army Corps of Engineers equipment. And I did that using what's called an IP address. And many of your listeners likely know that's the address associated with a computer,
Sure.
like a phone number
Sure.
is. So I figured this out. I sent the story off to the most watched TV station in New Orleans at that time, and they
Okay.
prompted the story, and the colonel had to issue an apology. Again, none of this is illegal. Nobody
Wow.
got in trouble. However, the PR damage that did to the Army Corps of Engineers, they've never recovered. Everybody remembers this. There's every day, Walmart was caught doing some unsavory things to promote themselves, and they were caught doing that they shouldn't be doing. And
Mm.
but the PR damage, the harm to their goodwill, is something that's almost irreparable. So we did that, and that certainly brought a lot of attention to my group and what we were doing, and that only continued to lift us more and more.
You must have had so much courage to not get mired, I suppose, in the personal feelings of being attacked. I don't know how to liken this except for thinking about like online bullying or, there's a lot of influencers that get trolled and attacked. And it can have a real mental health downside to it. And I don't know if you know how to explain this even for yourself, and or maybe you do and you've had some moment to process and think about it. But what was it? Like, what was the trait, the characteristic that made you be able to say, you know what, I don't care that they're, bullying me and they're saying all of these things to personally put my reputation at risk. It's hard. It's people want to make bold moves, but then sometimes they face the scrutiny and it is that thing where they're like, okay, maybe I just need to like back down or get quieter because I'm just like, I don't know if I can do it.
Certainly, there's two sides to that coin. There's the fear of being criticized and the fear of being you know, publicly being criticized. Okay.
Mhm.
In my
Mhm.
mind, right from the beginning, this is one side of the coin. I realized if all this energy is being
Mm.
spent criticizing me, a nobody, I must be
Yeah.
right, or on the right path. Okay. And I realized
Mm,
I must be doing something right. And it had
mhm.
nothing to do with me. They're worried about what I'm saying. In fact, one more thing about this side of the coin.
Yeah,
I
sure.
often heard people say, well, maybe you're right. I don't like your tone. I now know there's nothing wrong with my tone. They just don't like what I'm saying.
Mhm,
Okay. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin.
mhm.
In the process of doing my work, exposing the people who did wrong, I was put in a position where I had to disagree with lots of people in the community, well-known people in the community, and of having to disagree with them publicly. And this is so important for you listeners.
Mhm,
When I was put in the position of having to do this, I had to remind myself, if it wasn't Mary Smith, opposing what I'm saying. It would have been Marilyn Patterson. It would have been someone else. It's not about that
mm,
person. It's about what we're talking about. And
sure.
that is, it took me years to figure out that
Mm,
other other side of the coin. I was okay people beating me up. I had trouble beating up other people who were towing the line, who were putting out wrong information. And I realized if it wasn't her or him, it'd be someone else. Get
mm.
past it. It's going to be okay. And they know that too. They know that. And I tell you what, it's not intuitive, and did take me years to figure this out.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you share that. I think people have a really hard time depersonalizing the experience or the negativity, the criticism. I certainly have been in that spot too, right? Where it's like we're taught, to people please, and dissenting opinion doesn't please people. So of course it makes us a little bit anxious or feel overwhelmed or scared about the repercussions. But the advocacy and the truth that you're fighting for is so much more powerful and feels like it made you just push through and be like, I see the picture more clearly now because I have the strong mission that I believe in.
Uh, Something happened just last week. I put out a petition. I'm helping a couple who are being attacked because they have purple martin gourds in their backyard. If any of your listeners know about purple martins, they're a bird that depends on human. Well, one of my friends said, "Well, I'm not going to sign your petition," and was kind of mean about it. And my attitude is, okay, okay.
Right,
I
right,
don't
right.
care. I
Yeah.
didn't write it for you. I didn't put this petition online for one person. I did it for the Purple Martins. That's just an interesting
Yeah.
thing that happened recently. It's not about me. It's not about the couple that I'm trying to help. It's about the birds. It's about the issue.
I took a pause there because I am just thinking about my journey, and I feel very passionate about sharing these bold move stories. And one, being able to be part of getting them out into the world in a more public way. And then two, helping to inspire and empower other people to go for whatever it is they believe in and not be held back by whatever might be holding them back. And sometimes in my journey, in my personal journey of being bold, now it's like, okay, I took that step of I have the message and the mission, and I feel very passionate about it. Now, how am I going to activate it? And I'm hosting an event coming up in a few weeks. And, I have those questions of doubt. Is anybody going to show up? Is anybody going to want to attend this? And for so long, those questions of doubt held me back from taking that step to put it out there and to do it. And I've finally gotten to a point and a place where I feel that exact way that you're just describing, Sandy. It's not about me and it's not about that one person saying yes. It's about the bigger message, the bigger mission that I want to share with people to help them. If anything I can say can help unlock something for them to help them write their own story or put them in the driver's seat of their life, then I'm compelled to do it. It's not just about me. It's about making people feel supported and encouraged. And if that reaches just one person, then it's worth it. So a little bit of a sidetrack, but I think it's really important because obviously how you are able to conjure up your strength to fight against bigger powers is one thing, and that's like on a massive scale. But I think it applies to the individual as well, right? We all have something we feel excited about and passionate about it. And if we can just get over personalizing it, then we can actually make more inroads.
It's very natural to feel a little scared, a little hurt, a little like,
Yes.
why? But I think the overarching is confusion. Why are people fighting me? Why would anybody be against what I'm trying to do? It's more confusion than anything else. And then with time,
Yeah,
you find out why. They might have a reason, but it doesn't matter. You just keep going,
exactly.
and it's not, again, it really isn't about you. And I think add to this conversation is anyone who's read my book knows that almost every 10 or 12 pages I would say, well, after I did yoga, or after I did tennis, or after I did, and so I'm a big believer in physical exercise,
Mm.
daily if possible, even if it's taking the dog for a really long walk. I'm a big believer in physical exercise to help, because we're human. We're not robots. And yeah, I was hurt and confused, and wondering why people are acting this way. But I think the exercise, in my motto is, and I think I came up with this one, is
Yeah.
exercise as a way of taking big problems and turning them into little ones.
A little movement goes a long way. You get out of your I think that this is it. You get out of your dinosaur brain and you get into that part of your brain. And I think it's the left brain or the right brain, the part that's creative and the part that solves problems when you're actually in movement and you're out in nature, maybe, or you're not sitting there thinking about the problem.
Yep, it's like magic.
All right, let's keep going on your journey because it is so compelling to hear how you've been able to do this over 20 years. And so that's my next question. Now we're 20 years later of you starting this movement of this and your foundation to bring more awareness and education to levees and making sure that they are strong enough to support what they need to support. So the question is, how did your vision grow as you gained support and made progress?
the It's critical whenever you're trying to do something important, and something that you think is important, to stick with that mission, and don't branch off into other missions, and don't get sidetracked. People will
Mm.
try to get you sidetracked and try to get you to do what they want you to do. It's critical to stick with your mission, until you've gotten there. And I did, quote unquote, get there. My organization, not me personally, I can't do anything alone. But our mission was probably sealed. What sealed the deal was when the Associated Press issued a style guide change to Hurricane Katrina. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with what a style guide is?
Yes, yeah, for sure. I'm a writer as well, so I live and die by the style guide.
So you're familiar, but most of the world doesn't know what a style guide is. So a style guide is written for journalists and reporters, and it's their Bible, and they refer to the style guide whenever they write upon a subject. One big example is Hurricane Katrina, and the Associated Press changed its style guide, telling all of its reporters, international, worldwide, that whenever you talk about the flooding in New Orleans, you must include mention about the failure of the levees federally built.
Wow.
And in
Wow.
my mind, if I were to select, how do I know we succeeded? That's it. And that happened in 2022, almost
Okay.
almost 20 years later. But it's done.
Yeah.
And having that completed and behind us, our mission hasn't changed, but we've taken on a new goal. And that is, my organization wants for every single student in the United States working toward their bachelor's in engineering to receive instruction on failures, and the lessons can be learned from them. And right now, that is not going on. We're going to make that happen. That's our mission right now.
Oh, I love that. I love how you accomplished a goal for, the AP style guide. You're like, okay, we have over or foreseen the initial vision. Maybe we've gotten a lot of awareness in the public domain that this was not just about the hurricane. This was a levee failure. It had nothing to do with the preparedness of the citizens of New Orleans. um, this was a national systemic failure. And and now you've broadened how you're going to impact and make change, and it's starting with the education system and engineer degree programs. And it's amazing that they don't teach that history in schools today. And I'm sure this is one one part of American history that is also left out of other. I'm sure there's a lot of different examples of how this is. And don't they say that history is the best predictor of future success? So it's really a shame, but thank you for that incredible work so that these engineers coming out of school can learn from what went wrong so we don't do it again.
All of them, not some of them. Yeah, some schools are. I can name one that I know is Dale Carnegie Engineering School. That's great, but that's one. There's 200 schools,
Wow.
200 at least. So
Wow.
that's what we're working on now. We've had a lot of success. It's going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint
Yeah.
because huge changes have to be made, but we're on it.
I am supporting and cheering you on. I have two final questions for you, Sandy, before we wrap up today. How has this experience shaped your perspective on making bold moves?
I now know why a lot of people have plans and changes and that they want to make to their lives and why they don't. It's
Mm,
that fear of the unknown, that fear of, well, what if this, what if that? Now, I understand that now. And I also understand that if I could pull off what I did, I led this. I didn't do everything myself, but I led it. If I could pull this off, everybody can do anything they want, but they've got to get past those the, the stoppers, for lack of a better word, the things stopping them, which is why I created my podcast called Beat the Big Guys,
mm,
exactly for that, to help people who are on the fence see a
mm.
problem they can help, but don't know how or are afraid.
I asked this question of all of my guests as the final question. What do you know today about being bold you wish you would have known earlier on?
I already mentioned today the people who said they didn't like my tone, that even if I'm right, they don't like my tone. And I think when I heard that, I think I actually did try to tone down my rhetoric a little and speak a little less and a little softer. If I could do it all over again, I would have talked more often and been louder because I now know there's nothing wrong with what I was doing. There's nothing wrong with what I was saying. It's just that the people hearing it didn't like it. They didn't
Mm.
like it. And that means you're being successful. And that's the one thing I would change. I would have taught louder and more.
What a great note to leave off on, Sandy. I hope everybody listens to that advice and uses their voice to speak up on issues that they are passionate about and want to see change. Thank you for joining me on the Bold Moves How Did You Know podcast. Where can listeners find you, learn more about you and your organization?
Well, I'm happy to stay. It's a one-stop shop. If anyone wants to know about levee.org, about my book, about my podcast, about the work we've done, about all the museums that we have, one-stop shop, sandyrosenthal.net. That's my name, .net.
Oh, great. Thank you. I encourage everybody to check out what Sandy is doing. She's a real change maker, making bold moves all the time. And thanks, listeners, to tuning in. We will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.